September 17th, 2012, meeting of the Finance Committee of the Lake Forest City Council. Roll call, please.
Mayor Cowhey,
Here.
Chairman Pandaleon,
Here.
Alderman Novit,
Here.
Alderman Waldeck,
Here.
Alderman Moore is absent, Alderman Schoenheider,
Here.
Alderman Tack,
Here.
Alderman Palmer,
Here.
Alderman Adelman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you. The second item after the roll call is consideration of the minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held on July 16th, 2012. Any comments or corrections? There being none, I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay, the minutes from July 16th are approved. Third item on our agenda is the approval of a contract with FOLEY and LARDNER LLP for bond counsel services for Special Service Area 25, 26, and 29 bond refinancings. This is going to be presented by Director of Finance Elizabeth Hollop.
As summarized in the package, following the city's successful bond refunding in 2011, the city approached Lake Forest Bank and Trust regarding the possibility of refinancing 3 special tax bonds for special service areas 25, 26, and 29 that are outstanding with the bank. Lake Forest Bank and Trust has offered an across-the-board reduction in interest of 1.50% in interest on those special tax bonds for the remaining term of all 3 bonds. The item before the committee is a recommendation from staff to authorize a contract with FOLEY and LARDNER LLP for bond counsel services to draft the required ordinances to refinance the bond agreements for special service areas 25, 26, and 29 to bring back before the City Council by the end of November to authorize the refinancing of these bonds at a savings for the affected property tax payers.
Could you mention what the remaining term is on these bonds, and also maybe give us a little better sense of where these 3 special service district areas are?
Sure. Special Service Area 25 was the Knollwood Sewer Extension. There are 22 property owners involved in that. That was in 2003. The original amount was $1,050,000, and that matures in 2022. Special Service Area 26 involves 7 property taxpayers, and that was the Waukegan Road Sanitary Sewer Extension. That was $276,500 in total, and that was initiated in 2003. That also matures in 2022. And Special Service Area 29 was the Saunders Road Sanitary Sewer and Potable Water System. That impacts 16 property owners. That original amount was $2 million. It was initiated in 2004 and matures in 2023.
And so what these are is the savings from these refinancings will inure to the benefit of the residents, correct?
Correct. Currently, they are repaying these special tax bonds on their property tax bill. So the net interest savings would simply reduce their property tax payments through the maturity of the bonds.
And just for the record, district or area 25 is the net interest savings, and this is over the, I presume, over the life of the remaining life of the bonds, is roughly $55,000 for those homeowners. Area 26 is approximately $9,600 for those homeowners, and area 29 is $134,000, roughly $500 in savings for those homeowners.
Correct.
So this is a nice little, I guess, piece of good management that's benefiting these specific homeowners.
Could I ask one question, and it's a very obvious question? We're benefiting the homeowners, which is great, but we're bearing the expense. Is the expense passed on to those who are benefiting by the reduction?
It is. The bond counsel costs will actually be deducted from the gross interest savings.
Okay.
And so they will bear these costs.
So, yeah, granted, it's $7,000 for each of them. The homeowners will bear that, not the community as a whole.
Correct.
And the numbers that I read off are net of those costs.
Okay.
Any other questions?
It's only good.
Entertain a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next item on the agenda is discussion or presentation of proposed modifications to the general fund balance reserve policy, presented again by Elizabeth Holub, Director of Finance.
As a precursor to the committee's consideration of the fiscal year 14 fiscal policy later in the meeting agenda, the staff is seeking Finance Committee's consideration of a change in the city's current policy regarding the fund balance of the general fund. The city's current policy regarding the fund balance in the general fund is to retain a general fund balance of 15% of operating revenue plus the accrued sick and vacation leave balance as of the fiscal year end each year, and has consistently exceeded this minimum threshold. Given national economic conditions over the past few years, both bond rating agencies and other users of financial statements have taken increased scrutiny of fund balances of local governments and looked closer at fund balance policies of local governments. And in doing so, finance officers across the country have brought forth more conservative fund balance policies to their elected officials. And so in doing so, we wanted to provide some additional information to the Finance Committee to consider. Provided in the Finance Committee's packet is the Government Finance Officers Association best practice regarding fund balance policies in the general fund, in which they provide a minimum recommendation of 2 months of regular operating revenues or expenditures, which is 16%. Now, this is a minimum threshold of local governments across the country. However, as a AAA rated community, we thought a better benchmark for the city to consider are other AAA rated communities within Illinois. Therefore, we looked at some statistics provided by Moody's Investors Service as of April 1st, 2012, and those minimum benchmarks were provided in the Finance Committee packet, providing Illinois medians for cities, the 18 cities rated AAA by Moody's as of April 1st, 2012, showing that many communities with a AAA rating are showing fund balance policies well in excess of 15 or 16%. Another factor to be considered is the state's budget crisis and whether or not that might impact the city's budget in future years, with the ongoing threat of the state either reducing state shared revenues or passing along other unfunded mandates, and the potential of that impacting the city's budget in future years. The city is recommending an increase in the city's fund balance reserve policy from 15% to 25%, in addition to the continued inclusion of the accrued sick and vacation leave, which is an existing liability on the city's part.
Questions?
So if we take it to 25%, that would be 3 months from 2 months, basically.
Correct.
Did anyone look at, with the other AAA rated municipalities, if there was a trend? In other words, has this always been what they did, or has it been going up, has it been going down?
In the last few years, many communities have seen a decline in their fund balance reserves because they've been using their fund balance reserves to balance their budgets. And so they've been using those to leverage and maintain their service levels in times of declining revenues.
So if we wait a year, we may have the other AAA rated municipalities at 16%.
They might be down with us.
We're going against the stream, we're like the salmon swimming upstream. The question is, what do we invest these in? Because you can't get a return on anything. So this is like dead money. We could buy municipal bonds of other municipalities.
Yeah, that's right.
Of troubled ones that are paying
Yeah.
high prices. All right, thank you.
Other questions? Okay, well, I guess I have a question, and that is, if we're all of a sudden reserving that much more capital, I guess this sort of dovetails on Bob's question. Does that put any strain? I mean, that limits our flexibility with regard to other uses of that capital, right? I mean, it's being reserved, so we effectively don't want to use it, wouldn't use it.
Well, one important aspect is that the city has consistently been in excess of 25%. So this is not a change in practice. So the city's actual fund balance reserves in the general fund have been over 25%. So this is really just changing the policy to set that threshold from 15 to 25% and set that policy and send that message to the users of the financial statements that that is the city's new benchmark, and send that message to credit rating agencies and other users of the financial statements that that is the new measure used by the city.
Good, thank you.
Have we gotten any kind of input from these rating agencies or other users that this would help keep our rating high or our costs lower? I know it kind of is commonsensical, but.
Yeah, we had a conversation with Spear Financial, the city's financial advisory firm, who indicated that 25% is typically a general benchmark for credit rating agencies on AAA, but they generally look at the makeup of a general fund revenue sources. The city of Lake Forest has a benefit in that the majority of the revenues in the general fund is property tax, which is a very secure revenue source. And so when you look at a general fund budget that's more sales tax driven or more economically sensitive driven, they look for a higher fund balance reserve target than one that is more stable. But 25% is a general benchmark for AAA.
And we've gotten the benefit of that because we've been over that.
Right.
Even though we haven't had a policy.
Right.
So the policy is like a belt and suspenders to make sure we don't.
Absolutely.
Other questions or comments? I would entertain a motion to approve the recommendation.
So moved.
Do I have a second? Second from Alderman Adelman. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. And then, next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 2014 mission statement, also presented by Elizabeth Holland.
The first step of the fiscal year 2014 budget process is affirmation by the City Council of the city's mission statement. It is included in the packet. There are no recommended changes, so it is the same mission statement that you have seen in prior years. That is just for the city, for the Finance Committee's consideration.
Any comments on the mission statement? Any suggested changes?
And move to approve?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the fiscal year 2014 fiscal policy, also presented by Elizabeth.
Included in the packet, again, as another item under the fiscal year 2014 budget process, is the City Council fiscal policy. This document is used for the development of the fiscal year 2014 budget. There are a few recommended changes brought forth by the staff for the Finance Committee's consideration this year. So I thought I would just take you through each one for the committee's consideration. First two are on page 2. First item is number 6 on page 2. This is not a recommended change to the current practices followed by the city, but the policy indicates that a 15% reserve is used for the city's operating funds. However, in practice, the city has used a fluctuating reserve in the various operating funds depending on the makeup of the revenues. So the suggested wording just provides that flexibility that is actually used in practice, and just sets forth that annually, the city will review the cash flow reserves in all city operating funds to ensure adequacy given the volatility and risk of revenues attributable to each fund. I don't know if you'd like to take all of these as a group or if you'd like to talk about each one individually.
You want to explain that a little more detail as it applies to different funds, to give an example?
Sure. For example, the water fund reserve requirement is actually 33% of operating revenues plus 1 year of debt service. So given the fluctuation of revenues, particularly with weather, the city has deemed that a higher reserve requirement is appropriate for that fund, given the volatility of revenue. So 15% is not used in the water fund, which is appropriate. So given the makeup of the revenues in each fund, the reserve requirement fluctuates from fund to fund. So again, no suggested change in practice is being recommended, simply that the policy provides the flexibility that is actually being used.
Okay.
Maybe move on to the next. I think we probably should go through them one by one. Just, and if there are questions about that. Okay. And item 7, I guess, is the next one.
Okay, the next item, also not recommending a change in practice, but as you'll see from the redesigned flash report, we've added a page to the flash report to actually provide an overall summary of budget to actual revenues and expenditures, which will allow the Finance Committee to monitor those on a monthly basis. So we've suggested some wording change here in number 7 to actually reflect that the actual revenues and expenditures will be monitored compared to budget throughout the year, to allow for reduced spending as needed to offset revenue shortfalls or unanticipated expenditures. So just to add the language regarding the monitoring that will take place monthly.
It seems to me in 7, you've made a mandatory requirement not mandatory, because it says reduce spending, which is mandatory, and now it's to allow for reduced spending, which is permissive. Instead of to allow, should you say to require? I mean, why is there the difference?
Okay, it's unintended. So we can say compared to budget throughout the year.
So that spending may be, will be.
So that spending shall be.
Right. Other comments on that item?
Okay.
Next item is number 3 under personnel.
In the prior year, the previous 3 and 4 were in one paragraph. It is suggested that those be split into 2 items because they deal with pensions and compensation. So just separate those into 2 items. And under 3, the pension item has been expanded to clarify that the state of Illinois actually sets the requirements under the compiled statutes, but that the independent actuary determines the funding requirements. And then also to add the second sentence suggesting some additional language regarding efforts to seek action by the Illinois General Assembly for pension reform to ensure fiscal sustainability. That is an issue of concern for many communities. So it is suggested that we might want to include that in the fiscal policy.
And the prior language simply referred to the state of Illinois actuarial requirements and us complying or meeting those. This goes a little further.
Right.
So any comments or questions on that? Okay. The next change was under, let's see, under capital budgeting, number 7, the last bullet point. And this is actually the special service area fund balances.
Yeah, this is mostly just a style change. Because this is the second time the formula for the fund balance is listed, it suggested that we just reference the benchmark rather than restate the formula, so that in the event you change the formula, you don't end up with a discrepancy instead of having the formula different in 2 different places, so.
The next item is Roman numeral 4, reserve policies, which we essentially just discussed. And this is,
Yeah, these are primarily just changes that relate to the implementation of GASB Statement 54. Fiscal year 12 will be the first year that the city implements the new statements on fund balance reporting. Under GASB 54, there is no more designation of fund balance, so we've stricken reference to designation. There is unassigned fund balance, so we've changed in 2 reference from undesignated to unassigned. Then again, the change from 15 to 25%. And then instead of net, which could be construed as being the difference between revenues and expenditures, change that reference to non-pass-through operating revenues, which is the revenues that are not simply run into the general fund and then transferred over to the capital fund.
I think that's, so there's one last remaining, just clarification of procedure where, under Roman numeral 7, number 6, there was a reference to the audit committee approving the selection of independent audit firms. In fact, what the audit committee does is simply recommend that to the city council. So that was changed to reflect the reality. And I believe, Elizabeth, that's the last, those are all the changes in the,
That is the
in the
last
policy,
one.
right? So I guess, with the one change that we discussed on the recommendation of Alderman Palmer, I guess I would entertain a motion to approve.
So moved with the amendment.
Do I have a second?
Seconded with the Palmer amendment.
The Palmer amendment, we'll call it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. I have to scroll all the way back to the agenda here. The next item is other business, which Elizabeth referred to the flash report. We've gone back and forth over the last year and a half talking about different ways to enhance the flash report to make it a little more informative. The prior flash report essentially had no information about expenditures. It was all about revenue, which I understood in the context of the time in which it was created was a critical item and was what we really cared about. And expenditures are generally not budgeted monthly the way we would do it in the business world. They're generally what we would call straight line through the year based on, just a 12-month cycle. But there are patterns, and the seasonality patterns are such that at any given moment, you would expect, for instance, snow removal happens in the latter half of the year, of the fiscal year, and you would expect not to have much of your snow removal budget expended, before November, December. So this is an effort with these percentages of expenditure to track whether it's a little rough. It's not as precise as we all might prefer it, but it does give us information that we didn't have before at kind of a high level about, are we spending this money faster or slower than we thought we would? And, we're certainly willing to accept other suggestions about this report, although I will say there are some limitations on what can be produced practically. And this is, to me, it's a satisfactory result, and we've been down this road, at least in the background, several times trying to get to this point, and I'm actually pretty happy with the way it came out. But if there are suggestions, we'd be certainly willing to accept them and
Oh, no.
consider them.
And appreciated the 3-year average on there helped me, as far as guidance on where we are. That was the first concern is, again, are we on target or off target? So you kind of anticipated the question. But let's work with it going ahead. It gives us a little more information, which is appreciated, so we know what we're missing or what we're on target for.
Without getting into so much detail that it takes, a half an hour to pick through it, which was another
Yeah.
consideration, so. The other item of well, I guess this is not really for action, these are just sort of information points. The fiscal 2014 budget calendar is attached. I'm not sure, I guess the one thing I would ask is, could you maybe point out to everybody an impending key date, maybe the first key date that's coming up, so that people can get that in their head?
You need to get in your calendars right away. These are, as the council knows, traditionally we have a fall budget meeting where we really focus on the capital improvement program so that engineering and other staff can gear up over the winter, the various capital improvement projects. And then the second meeting is our focus more on the operational expenses and revenues of the city. The first meeting is scheduled for 5 p.m. on Monday, November 19th, and that will be the capital improvement discussion. And then the second meeting is 3 p.m. on Monday, March 18th, 2013. And I just ask that you set that aside. Until we get further into the budget process, we don't know exactly how much time we're going to need. I think the last couple of years we've been starting roughly about 5 o'clock, which is probably more practical, but we want you to set that time aside now, and then we can adjust it as we get closer. Be happy to answer any other questions that you might have.
I have a question about real estate transfer tax revenues. Do we have any information about the inventory of unsold real estate? And if so, is it possible to get that and maybe give that to us on a monthly basis so we can sense, is this building up? Is it going down?
Yeah, I think we can get that. I think we would have to work with the real estate community, because what's happening in some cases is that properties are being pulled from being actively marketed to, say, rental.
Right.
But it's one of those that they're only doing it for a year, and then as soon as they think the market changes, then they'll flip it right back on. But we'll see if we can get you some kind of meaningful data on what's available and how that compares to 6 months, a year, 3 years ago.
Because I have a sense, and I've read articles about this, that particularly with high-end homes that can't be sold quickly, they're being rented.
Yeah.
And in fact, you have a new paradigm perhaps emerging, and so instead of real estate transfer taxes, they're going to be different occupants in the house, but not different owners. So I don't know how we deal with that.
No, and I think we're seeing the same thing. I don't know if Alderman Adelman has more information than us, but I think that's what we're seeing more of, is that people are not willing to drop the prices so much, and there is a strong rental market that they've decided to move in that direction.
Okay.
The other interesting thing I noticed, just looking at the numbers that we all received this go-around with the new flash report, and it's been a couple of days since I looked at it, but I want to say that the volume of transactions is up something like 40% from the same time last year. A dramatic increase in the number of transactions, but our actual revenues from the real estate transfer taxes are down.
It's because
So-
the prices are 50 cents on the dollar.
Well, that's the point. And so I just think that's just a very interesting indication of where the market has come. And it does appear to be clearing, which is good, because that hasn't been happening up to now.
And I can get you a matrix on a month-by-month basis. That's easy enough to pull down. I don't know the stuff off the top of my head.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll see what information we can get together for you.
Last item on the agenda before adjournment of the Finance Committee is an opportunity for the public to address the Finance Committee. Are there any members of the public that would like to address the Finance Committee?
Mr. Chairman, if we have some time, one of the items we were going to put onto the regular council agenda is a report from Michael Thomas on 3 items. One, to introduce representatives from the engineering staff. 2, to talk about the fact that our sprinkling ban is now officially done. And 3 is to talk about the recycling markets, which is not positive news, but I'll let Michael report on it.
Okay. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Mr. Chairman, Honorable Mayor, members of the Finance Committee, will begin with the sprinkling ban. It has been lifted as of September 15th. As promised, the postcard that we sent to the residents received the weekend of July 21st, stated that via the IDNR regulations, Department of Natural Resources, May 15th through September 15th is when we put on the sprinkling ban. So our water plant is doing fine. We're pumping about 6 million gallons a day. Our new filters are in. They're working great. We are probably going to reduce the number of filters we recommend being replaced for next year's capital improvement. So that's a very good thing. We'll be reducing that amount in the capital plan. So we just wanted to let yourselves and everyone know at home that feel free to water whenever.
Now that my
good to
grass
go.
is all dead.
And particularly tonight when we're gonna have thunderstorms.
Yeah. Right.
Just turn on those sprinklers.
But we will be notifying the landscapers and homeowners in the springtime as well to try and get ahead of the curve this time. So, number 2, the recycling. As we've indicated in the past, the city sells its recyclables to a company called Resource Management. We have a contract with them. What we wanted to show you is the price per ton has continued to decrease over time. And in November or October of 2011, we took a large hit, and they simply said the market was correcting itself and there was some impact with the paper markets. The recent hit was clearly a reaction with the paper markets. There are warehouses full of newspaper and as well as office paper. The mills that use this paper, from the report we received, a number of them are filing for bankruptcy and are going out of business. So the companies that Resource Management sells the newspaper to, they're non-existent. China is beginning to catch up on their material and beginning to find other sources of this recycled paper. So from an environmental standpoint, it's good that people are moving to the iPads and the cell phones, et cetera, but we truly now are beginning to get into that point where we're seeing the effect. And as a result, the market really reduced significantly down to approximately, I think we're upwards of $3 a ton. We'll continue to watch it and monitor it, because in addition to the revenue we receive, we have to pay an expense of approximately $350 a load to move the material down to Chicago Ridge. So net, it's a loss, but it's nowhere near what it would cost to put the material in the landfill. We're nowhere near that. But I simply wanted to bring this to you to highlight the fact that revenues are down, they will be down, and we'll adjust our revenue figures accordingly with finance for current fiscal year. Do you have any questions?
I would point out that this drop was about the same time that we issued iPads to the Indy City Council.
That explains it.
Yes. And the final comment as far as the recycling, the carts are being handed out to the remaining residents, and we've had a handful of residents that have not necessarily welcomed the carts, but a majority of them have, and we're adjusting accordingly and trying to do our best to change them out. If the resident wants a smaller cart or a larger cart, we may run out of the smaller ones and need to order, but as soon as we can get those in, we will change the carts out. So far so good. We have about 1,000 left to hand out, and that will be done this week and next week. So, final item, I'd like to introduce Bob Ells. Bob Ells is with our engineering section. Part of the Department of Public Works is the memo I sent around to council and everyone in the city of Lake Forest. With Ramesh moving on, we have 5 people in our engineering section. Ramesh has moved on, so we have 4 now. So Bob Ells has been with us since April of 2003. He worked in Glenview for 2 years, and before that, spent a majority of his career in the Air Force with engineering, and they moved him around all over the world. So he's been everywhere working on various engineering projects, managing projects, designing projects. So we want to officially let you know and put a name with a face with Bob Ells. Bob is the one that will be handling the engineering now. We'll be bringing on an assistant to fill the void and help things as we get into the design phase. As Bob noted, after we potentially receive your approval at the November 15th capital budget meeting, that is when we really start getting into designing our overlay, our concrete programs, our water mains, et cetera, so we can place those projects out to bid. So Bob and his staff will be going through all of that. So, Bob Ells. Any questions?
Ramesh had made a couple of promises to me. Will Mr. Ells be able to?
We're seeing Ramesh tomorrow. We can pass those on if you'd like.
I'm sure the city of Highland Park's got in the budget, so.
No, just a quick question and filling time a little bit. With the drop in price for recycling and lower demand on paper, we've seen a reduction on tonnage of garbage or recycling overall.
It will be interesting once we get all of the carts handed out to look at those numbers again. As I mentioned earlier, with half the town, we saw recycling go up by 17%. Now, as we roll out the carts to the second half of the city, we should see those numbers go up in a very similar manner. And yes, we are seeing a reduction in overall refuse.
The landfill refuse.
Correct, the landfill refuse. It truly is, like everything else, the economy. When the economy is good, there is more garbage, and we can see the direct correlation. We were upwards of 10,000 tons a year. We're down to 7,500 tons a year in refuse. Now, granted, the recycling has gone up to about 2,200 tons a year, where we may have been at, gosh, 1,800, 1,700. So we're starting to see those numbers change somewhat, but garbage has definitely come down.
Yeah, I was more interested in just the idea of a reduction of paper usage. And I don't know if we break it down on tonnage for paper for recycling.
They
It might be
provide
too
us
early.
what's referred to as a single stream price. So once a year, they actually do an audit of our material. The trailer comes, they dump it out on the ground, and they figure out percentages of how much newspaper is in the load, office paper, cardboard, plastics, all the various material that's in there, and they allocate those percentages, and then they have prices for each of those. So glass, for example, is always an expense. Glass is something that they prefer not to see, but it costs them to actually reuse or recycle that material. But we get an audit done every year that breaks down the percentages of the material. They apply it then to the prices that they receive, and we get a monthly update. Usually by the 5th of every month, we have a number for what the price will be for that month.
Michael, I had a quick question. What happens with the handful of residents who still do not either want or have a card? At what point do you simply no longer pick up their recycled materials?
October 1st.
Okay.
We've made that pretty clear that we are going to change over to the carts. As I mentioned, we do have approximately 200, 250 what we refer to as privates, where people actually put the material in the trunk of their car and drive it out to the curb. Those we need to logistically figure out how we're going to pick them up, because they obviously can't have a cart because they have a very, very long driveway. But the equipment to go in and pick that cart up, we'll have guys on injured reserve if they try to pick up one of those carts over their shoulders. So we need to get a small piece of equipment potentially to go back and get the carts. But for 98, 99% of the households, October 1st, we have said, please begin using the carts. Otherwise, then we will not pick up recycling. They can keep the bins and use them around the house, but we want to make that final change.
Rewinding back to the water, I know we had some conversation at the council level, and I believe Parks and Rec did too, looking into a well for the golf course. Where are we in that process timeline-wise?
Last week, myself and Mary, Bob Ells, and Bernard and Tom Wilson sat down to talk, and we met with a well company to figure out, to try to get us into this ballpark of how much a well is going to cost. Various numbers have been thrown out, $500,000, $750,000. So we're going to meet again this week to try and refine that even more. One expense we know that is out there is updating the irrigation system from the standpoint of your irrigation system is pulling water from the city's water main. Now it's got to be able to pull water from a pond that this well will discharge its water into. So there's some changes with that system that need to occur. There's electric out there, which is good. If there wasn't, we'd have some issues. We'd need to bring electric out for the well. And now we're just trying to figure out logistics as you do this construction, the spoils that come out, the material that comes out of the ground, the water. So we really are trying to put everything together to be able to come back to the Park Rec Board as well as City Council with an estimate to say it will cost $1 million or $750,000 or whatever the number is. From there as well, financing options. Obviously, the golf course doesn't have enough money, I don't think, in their funds to be able to fund something like that. So City Council will need to have a discussion if they want to pursue it. How do you fund such an improvement? But we'll be able to definitely by that November budget meeting have a pretty good solid number of what we think a water well would cost.
From a practical standpoint, if all the pieces fall together, is it possible to have an operating well in place for next season?
It is. Logistically, we would want to do it over the winter, primarily because of the amount of equipment that needs to get way in the far back corner of the course. I think it's near hole 13. The weight of those trucks, the cement trucks, the drilling trucks, the spoil trucks, the semis, you want to have the ground solid, hard. So you really want to start a project right after January. The drilling could take upwards of 5 weeks, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, where it's actually drilling. They're proposing to go down approximately 1,400 feet. So there's a halfway decent amount of material that they need to pull out. I believe they're looking at an 18-inch diameter well. But you definitely want to do it during the winter months when you're not going to disturb the course physically as much. But that's the latest information we've received so far, so we're going to try and.
You did say 18-inch well.
That's what they showed on the diagram, but again, I think as we get into this further and bring out some more people, we'll refine it more. But it's based upon how much would the irrigation system need to pull out of the pond, gallons per minute. So you need a well that is going to support that depending upon how the irrigation system is set up. So that's what we're being told right now.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other items from the City Council meeting that we can cover?
I know there was one item that was raised in an email over the weekend with respect to a hold harmless agreement, and Vic is prepared to talk about that with the TIF consultant. I think Kathy may have handed out, did you hand out? Oh, Don has that, okay. And maybe we can, if Alderman Schoenheider will pass that out, we could ask Vic to sort of walk through revised language, and our understanding is that the consultant is agreeable to the language.
If you don't have it yet, then you can't listen. You'll just have to wait until you get a copy. But in short, the proposed contract that the consultant had provided to the city included a fairly broad hold harmless provision in Section K on page 5 of the document. The type of activities that the contractor is going to do is not likely to give rise to any kind of liability. Nevertheless, I think that the scope of the proposed indemnification was far too broad. While there could be some grounds for city exposure, for example, if the city gives information which is just plain out incorrect and there's some kind of liability, in that case, there's an appropriateness to have the city indemnify. The language I've suggested, I think, is an even-handed way of dealing with the situation, and apparently the consultant is going along with it. So unless there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer those. Otherwise, I am done.
Any questions?
I think that does it for us.
Okay. Well, the next item on our agenda is adjournment. I would entertain a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee.
Move to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Finance Committee is adjourned.